Lyra lived in a small desert outpost with her father, far away from cities, people, and all the noise of the world. The outpost stood alone like a tiny metal box in a sea of red sand. Every morning, Lyra stepped outside and watched the heat rise from the dunes like waves. She liked the silence. It felt like the desert was listening. One afternoon, while her father repaired old machines, Lyra walked farther than normal. She carried a small water canister and kicked at the sand with each step. The sun was bright and the wind felt dry on her face. She almost turned back, but then something strange happened. The ground under her feet shook. It was not the soft shaking of wind. It was heavier, deeper, like something big moving under the sand. Lyra froze. The shaking came again, slow and weak, then stopped. She looked around, but the desert was empty. No machines. No storms. No animals. Only dunes stretching in every direction. Curiosity pulled her forward. She climbed the nearest dune and looked down. At the bottom was a shape half covered in sand. It looked like a huge stone, smooth, wide, and cracked. But as she came closer, she saw details that stone never had. Scales. Faded markings. A shape like a forehead ridge. And then she saw an eye, closed but huge. Her heart pounded, but she stepped closer. Eventually she whispered, "Hello." Nothing moved. Lyra slowly touched the surface. The stone was warm. She gasped and stepped back. A faint sound came from deep inside the creature. A dry, broken sound like someone trying to speak after years of silence. Lyra took one step forward. The giant eye slowly opened. A glowing yellow iris stared at her. Not angry. Not wild. Just tired. Very, very tired. The creature tried to lift its head, but only sand shifted. Its voice came out as a breath, not a true sound. Water. Lyra's hand shook. She looked down at the canister she was holding. It was small, barely enough for one person on a hot day. But the creature looked like it had not moved in centuries. Its skin was cracked, its scales dull, and its breathing weak. She held up the canister. "You want water?" The creature blinked slowly, as if even that took great effort. Again the voice came, soft and broken. "Water, please." A giant alien asking her for water felt impossible, yet Lyra didn't feel fear. She felt something else, sadness. The creature looked like it had suffered for a very long time. She stepped closer, opened the canister, and poured the water on a crack near its mouth. For a moment nothing happened. Then the creature's tongue slowly moved, pulling in the drops. Its eye brightened slightly. Lyra whispered, I'll bring more." The creature blinked again. It was the slow blink of trust. Lyra ran back to the outpost, her heart racing. She filled 2 bigger canisters, almost dropping one because her hands shook with excitement and worry. She didn't tell her father. He would panic, call the authorities, and maybe hurt the creature out of fear. She rushed back to the dune, sand flying behind her. The creature was still there, barely moving. Its eye opened when it sensed her return. "I came back," she said, lifting the canisters. The creature's voice was clearer now, though still weak. "Thank you." Lyra poured the water slowly, and this time the creature drank more easily. Its breathing steadied. A small part of its chest rose higher, as if new life was entering it. "What are you?" she asked quietly. The creature closed its eye for a moment, gathering strength, then opened it again. Its voice was like wind through old stone. "Vorther." Lyra tried to repeat it. "Vorther." A soft rumble came from the creature, a tired, amused sound. She sat beside it after giving the last drops of water. She didn't know why, but she felt safe, like the desert wasn't empty anymore. "How long were you here?" she asked. Vorther's eye looked toward the sky, as if remembering a time long gone. "Centuries, maybe more, trapped, thirsty, waiting." The word waiting made Lyra tilt her head. Waiting for what? Vorther looked at her, and for the first time, his gaze felt warm. Someone who would listen. The wind blew gently over the dunes, and Lyra realized something important. She had found something more than a creature. She had found a story buried in the desert, forgotten by time. And now, that story was waking up because she gave it something simple, a drink of water and a bit of kindness. She stood up slowly. "I'll come back tomorrow. I promise." Vorther blinked once, tired but grateful. As Lyra walked back to the outpost, she felt the desert differently. It wasn't silent anymore. It was alive, carrying the breath of something ancient. And she knew, deep inside, that her life had just changed forever. Lyra returned to the dunes the next morning with more water than before. She carried 2 large metal containers strapped across her shoulders. The sun was sharp, the sand hot, and the wind dry, but she pushed through it. She knew the giant creature, Vorther, would be waiting. When she reached the dune, she found him exactly where she had left him, half buried in sand, too weak to move. But something was different this time. His great eye opened the moment he sensed her footsteps. It didn't look dull anymore. It looked awake. Lyra smiled softly. "Good morning." Vorther tried to lift his head, but the weight of the sand held him down. Even then, his voice was stronger than yesterday, though still cracked from age. "You came back." "Of course," she answered. She placed the containers down and opened one. "I brought more water." Vorther's eye brightened. "You are kind, for a human." Lyra poured the water along the cracked scales near his mouth. He drank slowly, carefully, as if savoring every drop. When he finished one container, she opened the other without hesitation. After drinking, Vorther let out a sound that was almost a sigh, deep, low, and filled with relief. "Your water brings life to old bones." Lyra sat beside him and watched his chest rise and fall. It was the slow, steady breathing of someone who was healing. She wondered again how something so big could still be alive after centuries without water. She finally asked, "Vorther, how did you live for so long? Anyone else would have died." His eye drifted toward the horizon. "My kind cannot die easily. We are bound to the desert. Our bodies store heat. Our scales hold memories. Even when our minds fade, our hearts keep beating." He paused. "It is curse and gift." Lyra frowned. "Curse. Long life is lonely life," Vorther said. "My clan vanished. Storms buried us. Time forgot us. But still, we remain." Lyra felt something heavy in her chest. The idea of being alive but trapped for centuries felt cruel. "Were you waiting for someone?" she asked softly. Vorther blinked slowly. "Not someone. Something. Change." His eye returned to her. "You are that change." She didn't know what to say. She wasn't special. She was just a girl from a tiny outpost, someone who fixed machines and walked in the dunes when she was bored. But Vorther looked at her like she mattered more than she knew. After a long silence, he spoke again. "You brought me water. Others, long ago, brought fear." Lyra pulled her legs close and rested her chin on her knees. "People were scared of you?" "We were guardians once," Vorther said. "But fear twists stories. We became monsters in their eyes." "So they left you here?" Lyra whispered. Vorther closed his eye, heavy with memory. "They tried to kill us. But we do not die. They buried us in sand, believing time would finish what they could not." Lyra felt anger rise in her chest. "That's not fair." "Fairness is human word," Vorther said softly. "Not desert word." The wind grew strong for a moment and blew sand across Vorther's scales. Lyra stood and brushed the sand away with her hands. The scales were rough and cracked, but warm under her touch. Vorther didn't move. He only watched her gently. "You are brave," he murmured. "Most would run." "I'm not brave," Lyra said. "I just don't want you to be alone." Vorther's eye softened. "Alone is the first thing I learned. You are first to unteach it." Lyra sat beside him again. "I'll keep helping you. I can bring tools. Maybe I can dig you out." Slowly, Vorther warned. "If the sand shifts too fast, it will crush my wings." "You have wings?" Lyra's eyes widened. Vorther almost smiled. "Buried. But yes." Lyra looked at the dunes. They stretched high and heavy around his body. Digging him out would take days, maybe weeks. But she didn't care. She had already made up her mind. As the sun lowered, Vorther spoke again. "Lyra." "Yes. There is more." His voice grew deeper. "I am alive, not because my body refuses to die, but because a promise keeps me." "A promise?" "To protect," Vorther whispered. "Even when there is no one left to protect." Lyra felt the desert quiet around them as if the sands themselves listened. Vorther's eye met hers. "But now, you are here." She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Vorther was not just a creature. He was something ancient, powerful, and full of stories the world had forgotten. And somehow she had become part of the last promise he was holding on to. "I'll come back tomorrow," Lyra said as she got up. Vorther watched her with steady warmth. "I know." When she walked back toward the outpost, she felt different. The world felt bigger. The desert felt alive. And Vorther's words stayed in her mind. A dragon who could not die had waited centuries for her. Lyra returned every morning with water, tools, and a determined heart. Each day Vorther looked a little stronger. His eyes were brighter, his breathing smoother, and his voice clearer. But on the seventh day, something happened that neither of them expected. The desert felt different that morning. The air carried a strange vibration, like the ground was humming. Lyra sensed it before she even reached Vorther. Her footsteps felt lighter, the sand shifting strangely under her boots. She hurried over the last dune and stopped. Vorther was no longer half buried. The sand around him had sunken down as if pushed away from his body. The deep cracks in his scales glowed faintly with golden light, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Lyra stepped closer. Vorther? Are you okay? He opened his eye, and for the first time it was not dull or tired. It glowed, bright and ancient, like the desert sun itself. I am waking, Vorther said quietly, his voice stronger than ever. Lyra stood completely still. Waking? Long ago, he continued, my clan were guardians of this world. We were connected to the desert, to its heat, its storms, its life. When we grew weak, the desert grew weak with us. Lyra swallowed. So this light, is normal? For a guardian, Vorther said. But it has been so long. I did not know if my body would remember. Lyra knelt beside him and touched his warm scales. Is this because of the water? Vorther closed his eye, feeling her hand. Water helped. But something else stirs me. Something I thought I lost. What? Hope. Lyra felt her chest tighten. She didn't know what to say, but Vorther continued. Your kindness wakes old power inside me. It is small now, like a spark. But sparks grow. Suddenly the sand around them shifted again. A ring of golden light spread out in a circle from Vorther's body, traveling across the dunes like a wave. The sand settled, completely smooth. Lyra's eyes widened. Did you do that? Vorther slowly lifted his head for the first time. The sand slid off his neck in soft streams. I am remembering how, he said. My strength comes back faster than I expected. He tried to move his front leg, and the sand poured away as if obeying him. It didn't resist. It flowed. The desert answered him. But when he tried to lift his wing, buried under deeper sand, he stopped. A flash of pain crossed his eye. Lyra leaned in. Are you hurt? The bone beneath is old. Wait. It needs time. He lowered his head again. But I will rise. Lyra smiled softly. Then I'll keep helping until you do. Vorther watched her, his great eye full of something warm and protective. Lyra, when you first came to me I thought you were a strange little human. Small. Fragile. Thanks, she said, raising an eyebrow. But now, Vorther continued, I see something stronger. Something rare. What do you mean? You carry courage in your heart. You walk where others fear to look. You give when others turn away. His chest glowed brighter. This awakens power in me. Lyra felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to compliments, especially from an ancient dragon. Before she could respond, the wind suddenly shifted. A cold gust blew across the dunes, carrying dust and the faint sound of distant thunder. Vorther tensed. Lyra noticed immediately. What's wrong? That is not desert wind, he whispered. That is something else. Something old. Lyra looked around but saw nothing except dunes stretching to the horizon. Is it dangerous? She asked. Vorther listened carefully. His eyes narrowed. Long ago my clan fought creatures that fed on heat and life. Desert eaters. They came from shadows and storms. He paused. I thought they were gone. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. Are they back? I do not know. His glow dimmed slightly. But my awakening may have called them. Lyra stepped closer, her voice steady. Then we'll face them together. Vorther looked at her in surprise. You would stand with me? Even if danger comes. You're my friend, Lyra said simply. You're not facing anything alone anymore. Something deep inside Vorther seemed to shift. A warm pulse ran through his body, and the light in his cracks brightened again. As you help me rise, I will help you stand, he vowed. The wind howled again, louder this time. The desert felt colder. Lyra tightened her grip on her tools. Whatever is coming, we'll be ready. Vorther lifted his head a little higher. Then let the forgotten power return. I will rise again. Lyra stood beside him, small but unshaken. And somewhere in the far dunes, something old stirred in answer. The sandstorm grew stronger with each hour, and Mira felt the desert shaking beneath her feet. The sky above turned dark and wild, like the whole desert had decided to crush everything under its weight. She kept her arm over her face and leaned against the dragon's warm scales. The ancient creature stood between her and the storm, blocking most of the force with his huge body. The dragon breathed slowly, but Mira could hear the strain in every breath. Even though he had survived centuries without water, even though he was stronger than any living thing she had ever seen, the storm still pushed him back. His great wings folded tight, and his claws dug deep into the sand to hold his place. Mira tried to shout over the storm, but her voice was lost in the roaring wind. She knew they needed shelter, or they would both be swallowed by the storm. She pulled on the dragon's scales and pointed toward a dark shape in the distance. It was hard to see through the sand, but she recognized the silhouette of a broken structure. It looked like an old station half buried in the dunes. The dragon lowered his head and nodded. Even in the storm he understood her. He crouched low and Mira climbed onto his back. His scales were rough but warm and she held tightly as he began to move. Step by step he pushed through the storm, leaning his body into the wind. The sand hit him so hard it sounded like tiny stones striking metal, but he did not slow down. Mira kept her head low and her eyes closed. She trusted the dragon more than she trusted the desert. He had asked her for help, and she had given it without fear. Now he was the one keeping her alive. As they moved, the storm became even louder. A strong gust lifted the sand like waves, and the dragon stumbled for the first time. Mira felt his body shake, but he stayed upright. He forced himself to keep going even as the dunes shifted under his feet. Mira whispered softly, hoping he could hear her. She told him that they were close, that he was doing well, that she believed in him. She did not know if dragons understood human words, but she hoped her voice carried some strength. At last, the dark shape came into full view. It was a collapsed outpost tower, broken long ago, but still strong enough to block the wind. The dragon reached it and wrapped his body around Mira, shielding her as the storm slammed into them again. Inside the small space created by his wings, the air was hot and heavy, but it was safe. Mira sat on the sand and pressed her hand against the dragon's chest. His heartbeat was slow and deep, like the sound of distant thunder. He lowered his head beside her, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. She wondered how long he had been alone in this desert. How many storms he had faced without shelter. How many centuries he had watched pass while he waited for someone to understand him. She realized that even if he was powerful, he was also lonely, and loneliness could crush anyone. The storm outside grew even stronger, shaking the broken walls around them. The dragon curled tighter, protecting her. Sand piled around his wings, but he did not move. Mira knew he was using the last of his strength to keep her safe. She placed both hands on his scales and whispered that she was there, that he was not alone, and that the storm would pass. She promised she would stay with him, just as he had stayed with her. Hours passed. The roar of the storm slowly softened. The wind weakened and the sand fell back to the ground. By the time the storm ended, Mira and the dragon were buried in a dune of soft sand, but they were alive. The dragon slowly lifted his wings and the sand slid off like water. He stood tall again, his body tired but steady. Mira stepped out beside him, brushing sand from her clothes. She looked up at him with a small smile, and he lowered his head gently, almost like a bow. Together they faced the quiet desert. The storm had tried to bury them, but it had failed. Because now they faced it not as strangers but as companions. The morning after the storm was calm and bright. The desert stretched far in every direction, shining under the soft golden light. Mira stood beside the ancient dragon, feeling the warm wind on her face. The storm had changed the land around them, but it had also changed something inside both of them. She no longer felt afraid of him, and he no longer looked like a creature who had spent centuries alone. The dragon lowered his head toward her. His eyes, once filled with pain and tiredness, now carried something softer. Trust, gratitude, maybe even friendship. Mira gently placed her hand on his scales. They were smooth and warm under the sun. They walked together toward the outpost, the only place she knew how to return to. The journey was slow and the desert was still dangerous, but Mira no longer felt alone. Each time the wind pushed too hard or a dune shifted, the dragon shifted closer to her, making sure she was safe. It felt strange to her that a creature so big and powerful cared so much for a girl who had nothing to offer except kindness. As they walked, Mira told him stories. She spoke about her parents, who had worked in the desert before the outpost was abandoned. She spoke about growing up in a place where the days were too long and the nights too cold. She spoke about the loneliness she felt in the outpost, waiting for a supply ship that seldom came. The dragon listened quietly, his large eyes watching her with interest. He did not speak in words, but Mira could feel his understanding. Sometimes the dragon shared memories too, not with speech but with faint images he projected through the air. They were soft flashes of old worlds, tall mountains, shining rivers, and skies filled with stars she had never seen before. Mira understood that he had lived many lives, seen many places, and lost many things. Even so, he stayed beside her. When they finally reached the outpost, Mira felt a small ache in her chest. She wondered if the dragon would leave now that he was stronger. He had come far from the place where she found him. She had given him water and he had survived the storm. Maybe that was enough for him. Maybe his path was somewhere far beyond the desert. She stepped to the entrance of the outpost and turned to face him. The dragon stood tall, his wings half open, his eyes bright under the sunlight. Mira lowered her head, unsure what to say. She whispered that he was free to go. She told him that she would never forget him and that she was grateful he had trusted her. The dragon slowly lowered himself until his head was level with hers. He looked at her with deep calm, and Mira felt something move gently inside her mind, a thought not her own. It was simple, warm, and clear. He would not leave. He chose her. Mira's eyes widened. She watched as the dragon folded his wings and lowered his huge body onto the sand like he planned to stay right there. He let out a soft breath, almost like a sigh of peace. For the first time he looked like he was resting, not because he was weak but because he felt safe. Mira sat beside him, still unsure if she should believe what she felt. She placed her hand on his scales again. This time, the dragon nudged her gently with his nose, careful and slow, as if he thought she might break from a touch too strong. She laughed softly for the first time in weeks. From that moment on they lived in the outpost together. Mira shared her small supplies with him, and he protected her from the dangers of the desert. When raiders came near, the dragon stood between them and Mira until they ran in fear. When the heat became too strong, he shielded her with his wings. At night, she slept beside his warm body, feeling safer than she ever had. As the days passed, news spread across the desert. Travelers spoke of a young human girl living with an ancient dragon. Some called it impossible. Some called it foolish. But a few whispered that maybe humans were stronger than they seemed, kindness strong enough to win a dragon's loyalty. Mira never cared about what others said. She cared about the friend she had made, a friend older than stars who had searched for water for centuries. A friend who had survived storms, loneliness, and time itself. A friend who had chosen to live beside her when he could have flown away forever. And every evening when the sun fell behind the dunes, Mira sat against his side. The dragon wrapped his tail gently around her, as if keeping her close to the world he had chosen. He was no longer the dragon who begged for water. He was the dragon who chose a human friend. And Mira knew she would never face the desert alone again.